Okay, so the live stream should start any second now. Um, Guys, thanks for joining my office hours. Do you guys want to just quickly introduce yourself and then talk about kind of your ideas and questions, and then we can have a discussion?
Great. Sure, Greg. I'm Ralph. I'm a MBA student at Stanford. I previously to Stanford, I was a clean tech product person working in the electric vehicle space. And then I'm super passionate about climate and exploring some challenges in the climate tech area today. I'll pass it on to Max.
Cool. Hi, Greg. My name is Max. I'm a grad student at Stanford in the College of Engineering. Previously, I did computer science at UC Berkeley for my undergrad. And yeah, similar to Rauf, I'm super interested and super passionate about climate tech.
Great. Well, climate tech is a big deal here in Palo Alto, so we're definitely fans of it. I think we're probably one of the most aggressive cities in this area. So I'm happy to answer you guys' questions. So what questions do you have for me?
Great. So we read a lot about kind of Palo Alto's policies and aims for its sustainability goals. So we read about, for example, being carbon neutral by 2030. And we wanted to think more about how incentives play a role in accelerating the city's progress towards those sustainability goals. I guess at a high level, would love to first touch on how do you think businesses and people can use incentives better than they are today?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you guys are talking about this topic, because I think one problem we have in government is the lack of incentives. So for instance, in the private sector, companies are run by CEOs, right? And the CEOs, their compensation, in fact, most of it, like 90%, and sometimes in some cases, not 100% of it, is based on the performance of the company. But in the public sector, do you guys have any idea of how much of the compensation is incentive-based?
Zero.
Zero, that's right. Okay. And so what do you think the problem is when there's no impact of how the performance is on their compensation? What kind of impact do you think that has?
Well, I think compensation is a huge incentive towards performance, right? That's why companies use bonuses.
Yeah. In fact, higher you go, typically. So I actually tried to. So our city government, so I'm on the city council, which is like being on the board of directors. So the city manager is like the CEO of the city. And for most organizations, especially in the private sector, the CEO of the city is heavily compensated by variable comp, right? So their pay is tightly linked to the performance of their company, right, or organization. And I tried very, very hard to try to get at least a little bit, okay, maybe not like it is in the private sector, but just any small portion at all to be based on performance. And incredible resistance. And it's kind of, I think I forgot the exact term. You guys probably know. It's like moral hazard. I think that's the term. There's like a bit of a moral hazard, because the owners and the managers, the owners, of course, being the voters of the city, the taxpayers of the city, have very different incentives or motivations than the manager of the city, right? Because the manager of the city, basically, he gets a house in Palo Alto, gets a very high salary, bunch of benefits, right? And yet there's no linkage of his compensation to the performance of the city, right? So like, for instance, for the city budget right now, we're going to be losing money, right? We're going to be spending more money than we have, right? So we're going to be taking from our budget stabilization reserve, right? We're running negative. We can't print money, so we're just basically drawing down on our reserves. And for the head of a private sector company, they would have very low comp as a result, right? But not here in our city. So I love what you guys are trying to do, because I think that can be a dramatic change. And so just more specifically in terms of what you guys are doing, there was a program that started up maybe a year or so ago, maybe 6 months ago, where they were trying to incentivize people to bike to downtown. And I thought that was a great idea. So basically pay people cash, because each parking spot in our city is something like $60,000-$70,000. So it's a crazy amount of money to have parking. So if you just pay people a few dollars to bike, I mean, you could do the math, right? So if you could build less parking structures, it's just incredible cost savings, right? So I love this kind of things, but unfortunately, in terms of the unions and just the kind of incentives, it's hard to get staff to have incentive-based pay in any
Right.
sort of way.
Right. I guess the underlying point that you're getting to is that for a city like Palo Alto to meet its sustainability goals, incentives play a real role in impacting human behavior, right? And I think if we read a bit about the new rebates that are available for things like heat pumps and water heaters. I think the exact sort of service partner was Synergy. And we read that you pushed more for e-bikes because you believe that transportation has higher leverage towards reducing carbon emissions relative to natural gas and water heaters, which impact natural gas. And we read specifically that you did a calculation and did some analysis and came up with a number that you thought prioritized that lever for you. We'd love to learn a bit more about how does a city like Palo Alto decide what to prioritize? What data is used, and how does Palo Alto know that that incentive was actually successful?
Okay, so you asked a lot of good questions, because I also think that's a problem, right? Because we don't really measure our performance as well. I mean, we talk about SCAP and we kind of have these loose things, but we don't really link things as closely as we probably should, right? So that you talked about the heat pump water heater. One reason why I mean, right now the program has been a pretty abysmal failure so far. We allocated a bunch of money to it, but there's been relatively few takers. And one of the reasons why I was kind of concerned about this program is, first of all, our city is kind of a, Palo Alto, it doesn't get too hot or too cold here. It's pretty nice, right? So our temperature, we don't have crazy hot or cold temperatures. And so it's not like some places where, you really need to have but not in Palo Alto. Palo Alto is very temperate, right? So, and as a result, most of our carbon footprint output is actually people driving, right? Single occupancy vehicles. That's like 60-70% of our carbon. So it's the big knob, or in computer science they call it the high order bit, right? It's the high order bit. And so you just have to do a little bit on the high order bit, right? The big knob, to make a humongous difference. Versus, heating water is just a small slice of what of our carbon output, right? It's just such a small piece of it. And for me, I actually tried to replace my my gas-powered water heater, and I'm on a city council, right? And I was also the owner builder for my house. I actually know a bit about this, and it was crazy hard. I mean, just oh my God, just trying to go through the development center. I mean, it was months of delay. My family didn't have hot water. I mean, wow. It was just like, I finally gave up, and I tried really hard, and I wasn't that cost conscious. I was pretty much just trying to make it happen. And it was crazy hard. And so I can't imagine, even if you gave someone a lot of incentive to do it, that's gonna be that easy. And unfortunately, it looks like I was right, because there's been very, very few applications. I mean, I think they wanted 1,000, I forgot the exact number. They wanted a large number, and they've gone almost a fraction of that, a few percentage. And it's because it's because you have to change your house, right? You have to have certain size wires coming into your house, and you have to have a new breaker box, and you need to do this. You have to have certain airflow. I mean, it's like a whole shebang to make it happen. And I mean, for a new house, it's no big deal, but for an existing house like mine or other people, it's like a big friggin' deal, and that's the problem. So it's much easier to I've been trying to push for a scooter share program in our city. We approved it 3 years ago, but it's not as sexy as some other programs. And so even though it's kind of, I think it would have a much bigger dramatic impact and a much better return on investment, I think that there's been incredible resistance, because it's I think because it's a political process. It's very little scientific. I mean, if it was done by science and math and engineering, it'd be pretty clear that we do all transportation because that's how we really do it. But because it's political, it's much more based off of what seems exciting, right? And you could we love like building stuff. So we love like you could have a photo op and scoop dirt out of the ground, right? We love that kind of stuff. But that's probably some of the least effective programs we ever had. I mean, they look great in terms of photo op, but in terms of real impact, it's pretty low.
Got it. And so it sounds like two things. So one is there's this issue of using data to actually determine what to prioritize. And in this case, maybe the wrong thing was prioritized. But then second, there's a sort of funnel issue, which is even when someone actually applies, it does little impact because the process of getting the item or actually having it installed is very difficult. Do you think there's a top of funnel challenge where I'm curious as to how many people you think in Palo Alto that are actually aware of this and aware of all the incentives that are available and are also available of which incentives they can stack together to cover the high upfront cost of making the transition to something that's different when their thing that they have today probably works well enough.
Yeah. So, I think Palo Alto is a relatively affluent area. So, I don't like myself, I don't necessarily scrounge around for every little rebate and stuff like that. Some people do, but it's maybe if there's a service that does all of it, that would be kind of cool. I think the main issue really is, first of all, I think it starts with staff. So the people that actually run the city isn't really city council, right? We're like literally like a board of directors, so we don't really have an operating role. Our main role is to manage a city manager. But the problem is the staff in themselves don't really have this tight connection of, like, even in companies, like even lower level employees, right? They tend to have equity in the company, so they're very incentivized for the company's success. But you have this moral hazard issue going on with city employees where they don't live here, they don't pay tax here, so they're kind of somewhat indifferent in terms of necessarily there's not great alignment to necessarily the residents. So because I think it starts there where like, for instance, one thing I've been pushing for years now is the idea of a net promoter score, and it's very common in the private sector. It's like on Amazon, when you buy something, they instantly ask you, oh, how was the service, right? Or you go to a restaurant and say, oh, win a free hamburger if you take this survey. They're trying to get this constant feedback. In the public sector, it's like, we don't want the feedback. We don't want to know how bad or good our customer service was. And so there's this lack. It's not so much they don't know how, they don't have the data, they don't have the tools. It's like a willpower issue, right? There's this lack of incentive and willpower to make it happen. But there are some people who kind of like some programs and trying to make it happen. But I think it's largely kind of a incentive from the staff employees, right? And then I think in terms of incentivizing the Palo Alto residents, because you're looking at a relatively affluent, resident base. These little dollars are kind of nice, but I don't think anyone really, I don't think it doesn't drive big behavior changes, right? But I think it helps. Every little bit helps, right? But yeah, I think there's all. I mean, I tried to do the hot water heater before they had rebates, so it had nothing to do with the rebate, but it was just because I wanted to see if I could reduce my own personal carbon footprint, right? So that's so, for instance, one thing I do is I pretty much bike everywhere, right? I mean, I'll take public transit. I try to I do that also because I want to kind of see what it's like. Just by biking over, even when it rains, I've done my part, right, in terms of reducing my carbon footprint. But a lot of people don't want to do that, right? So can you create these little incentives or gamify it? I think that's actually I think one way to make it work.
Got it. And we read that if Palo Alto misses its sustainability goals by 2030, there's a chance it could purchase carbon offsets. What do you think?
We actually did that already. Yeah, we already purchased carbon offsets. Although the only big issue I have with the carbon offsets is we buy them in Mexico, or we buy them, in foreign countries. And I actually think that we should stimulate the local economy. I actually think that we should, these carbon offsets, first of all, I think we should buy in our country. We should help America first. And also, like, I don't know if you guys know, but we've had like, you know, some massive forest fires, right? So you see like wide swaths of areas. Like sometimes the sky turns red. It's crazy, right? So a few years ago during COVID, like the sky here was like, it's like being on Mars. It's like, and so rather than buying carbon offsets in, you know, some foreign country, I think we should use that money to repopulate our forests, right? To you know, go for or incentivize, you know, maybe invest in you know, new technologies to do local carbon sequestration, carbon capture versus you know, just some random foreign country, right?
Yep, got it. And after speaking to some individuals and businesses, we've learned that it's hard for people, even if they want to learn about what incentives are available, to actually determine which are available and if they're actually eligible. Do you have any advice on which data sources someone could use in California to learn about which, you know, incentives are available for clean tech?
Yeah, you know, I think actually it may be a good idea to try to get a consolidated source where you know, you could, because sometimes it's like, you know, the left hand not talking to the right hand. So, you know, sometimes it's in utility bills, sometimes it's this and that. You know, I think there's a big time awareness problem. Like, I think very few people know about all these incentives that we have, like rain barrels. We have rain barrels incentives. We have, you know, bike incentives. We have this incentive, that incentive, and all together really small, actually, although just a little bit of money. So then we get super excited about it. And also they tend to be a hell of a lot of work for the money, right? I mean, it's like just filling out the forms and doing all the rigmarole, all the red tape involved. It's like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me, right? It's like so little money for the work, for the money. I mean, so much work for the money you get.
Right.
So yeah, if you could consolidate all of it so that there's less red tape, right? So that there's not, you don't ask my address for the 10th time, right? For the extra $5 rebate that I would get, right? That would be probably make it a lot easier and more people to participate, right? Like some sort of like unified, because the city actually knows all this stuff, but you know, but the city doesn't have this kind of, it's not like Amazon, right? Amazon never asked me for my address again, right? They have it. They don't keep asking me every time I order, right? But you know, every time you do this, do a rebate form, oh my God, they ask you again. They ask you for the account number. Like, what is my account number? I have no idea, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's just friction, right? Especially when it's small amounts of money, it just makes it tough.
Right. We've also read that, you know, a lot of incentives in California have special eligibility for low-income districts, and you know, there is this kind of discrepancy of clean tech, you know, one needing to impact low-income districts even more because they suffer from ill effects of pollution on average more than other neighborhoods. But the high upfront cost is difficult to overcome, and I think this could really ease that friction. I'm curious. I know from your reading about your background, you're a founder yourself, and Focolata had a machine learning edge. You mentioned that these incentive applications are relatively kind of consistent, but you know, arduous to complete. How do you see AI or machine learning playing a role in this space in the future, if anything?
Oh, I think it's gonna be huge. You know, I think there's so many tedious stuff that people have to do, and I think these like large language models, you know, AI, machine learning is going to just be awesome. I think, you know, I was watching this talk. So I'm a Caltech alumni, and so I watch this. They have this every month or so. They have this a speaker that talks, right? And one of the speakers they talked was actually the former president of Stanford, Professor Hennessy, right? So he was one of the speakers that was talking, and the interviewer asked Hennessy, so what industries do you think will be impacted by AI? And his response was, oh, you should really ask what industry will not be impacted by AI? Because I agree with that. Actually, I think virtually every single industry will not be impacted by AI. But you know, I think the one industry that will not be impacted or will be super slow to be impacted is government. Okay, it's because that there's just not the incentive to do so, right? I mean, in the private sector, you see like a gazillion startups doing every single possible combination of whatever you could think of, right? But in the public sector, like, you know, I made the suggestion, like, hey, you know, we could try to automate some stuff with AI or ML technology, right? And they're like, you know, just a total lack of enthusiasm for that, right? Where no, we gotta, you know, because if you think about we're like, okay, example, we built this bridge across 101. It took us, I don't know, like 10 years or some humongous amount of time to build like this this bike bridge. Okay, I'm not talking about like Golden Gate Bridge. I'm talking about like a bike bridge. Okay, across 101, and it was something like $25 million. It was just this insane amount of money. And if you look at the cost of that bridge, the bulk of the cost was actually not the concrete, the steel, the construction work. It was actually like us talking about it and hiring consultants, and just so you can think about how we could speed up the process by with because a lot of what government does is communication, talking to people, right? You can think about how we could automate that, right? And same thing with these forms, right? I mean, just sometimes just a better CRM system would do wonders, right? So you don't have to keep asking people the same exact question 20 times, right? Yeah, so I think there's just so much opportunity, but I think, to Tennessee's question of what industry would not be impacted, it would probably be government, because they're super slow to uptake new technology. And it's unfortunate because so much of our economy the government has gotten so big now that it's such a big part of the economy, and yet it's probably the least efficient part of the economy.
Yep. I guess pivoting slightly, going to your experience as a founder, I'm curious, in the early days, given you're in the machine learning space, how did you access data for, in your case, it was retail customers, but how did you build those relationships, those early pilots, and be able to access data to train your models to then create the value that you would with your AI or machine learning solution?
Yeah, I started with retailers that were not, that particular about this kind of stuff, right? So like small retailers, right? Small local retailers. They weren't very profitable, but that's where you start. And then you slowly work your way up to kind of like big enterprise type retailers. If you guys are doing it in government, it's a lot harder though, right? Because government, they have incredibly long procurement cycles. But once you're in, it's like incredibly lucrative contracts, right? Because if you look at like a contract, and I scrutinize this a lot. If you look at a contract, like we're going to build a bath, like I think Shreen was doing a thing like you build a bathroom, right? In a private sector, it will be like half the cost, right? And public sector, double the cost, right? It's just for the same bathroom, right? It's just these incredible. So you could, because there's not this competitiveness, and the incentivization to really try to get the best price. You could get really great pricing from the government, but it's just super slow because it's a political process, and so it's hard for a startup, because for startups, what really matters is iteration. How quickly can you iterate? Because it's very rarely is the first idea you have going to be the right idea, and to get product market fit, you have to keep tweaking stuff, keep tweaking, right, to finally get it. And the problem with government, and this is one reason why I thought about also selling to government, but I decided not to, because of how slow and arduous it is, right? It's because so if your customer could be the consumer instead of the government, and maybe just have a we don't even need approval. It just kind of does it without the government's blessing. That's the best, because that way you can move fast without having to get like, just to give an example, we approved the scooter share program over 3 years ago. Okay, still not here. And we approved it. It was a unanimous decision. 3 years ago, we approved it, right? And at every meeting, every chance I get, I bug the senior manager, hey, where's our scooter share program, right? Because I'm really into the environment, and I know one of the best ways to reduce our carbon footprint is actually getting people out of the cars, right? Getting them on the scooters, right, or the bikes or whatever. And scooters, I think, are really great because, like sometimes it's a real slog if you got to carry your bike onto Caltrain, take it off the Caltrain, or you got to lock it up. Like I got 2 bikes stolen in Palo Alto, so it's that also kind of sucks. But scooter share programs are kind of neat because you just park it, don't have to worry about getting stolen. You don't have to maintain it, and you only pay for it when you use it. So it's like great because it's only a few dollars versus spending $800 on a scooter, right? So
right.
But still, like, the scooter share program is not in our city, and despite my incessant bugging staff about it, last time I asked staff, like, oh, how come we don't have the scooter share program here, and staff said, oh, it's because they want to charge us money. So then I asked Bird and all these other scooter share companies, like, hey, are they charging? They go, no, they're not. We're not charging them. And so it's like, but because it's not the incentive, right? They don't really like. It's not like they're not like there's not a great photo op. There's no real excitement about it. They just dragging their feet.
Right. I guess the last 3 minutes, you mentioned product market fit. I'm curious, how did you know you reached product market fit at Palo Alto, and what's your advice for an aspiring founder trying to reach product market fit?
It's very clear when you get product market fit. I mean, there's degrees of it, but it's really clear. I mean, product market fit is when your product sucks and people still want it. I mean, it's almost like the light turns on, right? You really see this pool, right? I mean, just it's very hard to get product market fit. It's like lightning in the bottle, right? But this way you have to iterate, because like very rarely is the first thing you're doing going to have product market fit. It's in fact almost guaranteed not. It's like throwing a dart and hitting the dartboard in the center. I mean, the chance of doing that is really, I mean, sometimes people are really good and get lucky, but most people are not. So you got to keep throwing that dart to get it in the center, and it's crazy hard. And it can take years to do it, right? And most people give up after a few months because it's pretty freaking hard. But once you do get it, it's just amazing, and the company becomes unstoppable, right? I mean, even if the product sucks, right? I mean, look at like the Twitter fail well, right? I mean, that thing barely worked, but everyone still used it, right?
Got it. Amazing. I want to be mindful of your time, Greg. So, and I think we're out of time. So thank you so much for making time.
Okay, good luck, guys.
We learned a lot.
Sure, of course. Okay, have a good evening.
All right, take care, Greg. Thank you, Shreen.
Sure.